Part 1. The Voice of Doubt. John Parker sat in his small kitchen one cold January morning, staring at the steam rising from his coffee cup. He was 40 years old, but he felt much older. Life hadn't turned out the way he once imagined. When he was younger, he dreamed of building his own business, traveling the country, maybe even speaking to people and inspiring them with his ideas. But somewhere along the way, he had given up. The dream still lived inside him, like a faint flame that refused to die, but it was buried under years of rejection, failure, and self-doubt. And that morning, as he sat in silence, he heard it again. That voice. "You're not good enough," it whispered. "You've failed before. Why try again? It's safer to stay where you are. Don't risk it." John had heard this voice for so long that he had started to believe it was the truth. He thought it was the voice of wisdom, protecting him from more pain. But in reality, it was something else entirely. Napoleon Hill once said that fear is nothing more than a state of mind. And John was beginning to learn that his whole life had been shaped not by facts, but by fears. The story we tell ourselves: when John was 20, he tried starting a small landscaping business. He worked hard, knocking on doors, handing out flyers, even mowing lawns for free just to prove himself. For a few months, things looked promising. But then winter came, business slowed, and he couldn't keep up with the bills. Friends shook their heads. His father told him, "Son, some people just aren't meant to be in business." And the voice in his head whispered, "He's right." So he gave up. Years later, he tried again, this time with an online store. He spent months building it, but when sales didn't come fast enough, he closed it down. Once again, the voice returned, "See? You're just not cut out for success." John didn't realize it then, but he was living inside a story. A story built from failure, rejection, and other people's doubts. A story he repeated so many times that it became his truth. But here's the real truth. The truth Napoleon Hill spent his life teaching. If you can imagine something, if you can dream it, that means you already have within you the power to achieve it. The dream chooses you as much as you choose the dream. A new realization that morning in the kitchen, John opened a worn-out book he had found in his father's old box, Think and Grow Rich. He had seen the title before, but this time, something made him actually read it. One line hit him like a hammer. "Whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve." He paused. Conceive. Believe. Achieve. Could it really be that simple? The voice in his head immediately pushed back. "You tried before. You failed. You're wasting your time. You'll only embarrass yourself." But then another thought broke through. Maybe the voice wasn't saying you can't. Maybe it was really saying you haven't yet. For the first time in years, John began to see his doubt differently. His doubt wasn't proof of his weakness. It was proof of his untapped potential. Every "you can't" was really a challenge. Will you rise higher? Every "you're not good enough" was really a reminder. You can grow stronger. Why we listened to the voice. As John reflected, he realized why he had given this voice so much power. Somewhere along the way, he had learned it was safer to expect nothing than to risk everything. He had learned it was easier to live with regret than to face the possibility of failure. He had learned it was more comfortable to stay small than to risk being judged, criticized, or laughed at. But comfort, as he now understood, is the enemy of greatness. And greatness, Napoleon Hill wrote, begins with desire. A burning desire. The first step. John closed the book and pushed his coffee aside. He didn't know exactly what to do next, but he knew he couldn't keep living small. So he made a decision. Not a big one, just a small step. He wrote down, on a sheet of paper, the business idea that had been sitting in his mind for years. Something he had dismissed 1,000 times before. He wrote it clearly, in bold letters, and underneath it he wrote, "This is mine. This dream chose me." It wasn't much, but it was a start. And as Hill said, the starting point of all achievement is desire. The lesson here's what John began to understand, and what you must understand too: your doubt is not the truth. Your failures are not final. Your fears are not facts. They are just shadows of past experiences and borrowed opinions. The real truth is this: the very fact that you can imagine your dream means you have the capacity to bring it to life. The fact that your heart longs for it means it belongs to you. Your job is not to silence the voice of doubt completely. It may never fully go away. Your job is to recognize it for what it is, and then choose to act anyway. Because every time you act in spite of fear, you weaken its power. And every time you give in, you strengthen it. That night, as John went to bed, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the fleeting kind that comes and goes, but the deep kind that grows when you finally begin to believe again. And that was the beginning of his journey. Not a journey free of failure. Not a journey without fear. But a journey fueled by desire, strengthened by belief, and guided by a new story, his true story. The story of who he could become. Backhand index pointing right. This was part 1. In the next part, John will take his first real step into action, and discover how desire, when turned into a definite purpose, begins to move mountains. Would you like me to continue straight into part 2 with John's next step, turning desire into definite purpose, Napoleon Hill style, or should I wait for your go-ahead? After you review part 1? Part 2, the architecture of the mind. The next morning, John Parker woke up with a strange kind of energy he hadn't felt in years. His old doubts were still there, whispering in the background, but something new had been planted in him, a seed of belief. As he sat at his kitchen table with his notebook, he stared at the words he had written the night before. This dream chose me. It gave him hope, yes. But almost immediately another thought arrived. Hope is not enough. And deep down, John knew it was true. He could not simply wish his way into a new life. He could not just dream and expect things to fall into place. As Napoleon Hill taught, success does not happen by accident. It must be built, step by step, brick by brick, with conscious effort, consistent practice, and unwavering commitment. That morning, John realized something important. He had to become the architect of his own confidence, the engineer of his own empowerment, the builder of his own belief. The prison and the palace. He thought back to all the years when his mind had been his enemy. The same imagination that could dream up amazing business ideas also built endless scenarios of failure. What if I lose money? What if people laugh? What if I'm not good enough? His mind had been busy, always building, always creating. But instead of a palace of possibility, it had built a prison of doubt. And now he finally saw the truth. If his mind was powerful enough to create that prison, then it was powerful enough to build the palace too. Napoleon Hill wrote that every person has the ability to direct their thoughts. Thoughts, when mixed with faith, become powerful forces. So the question wasn't can I? The real question was will I? Will I take responsibility for shaping my mind? Will I invest the time and energy to create a mental environment that supports my dreams instead of sabotaging them? The young artist. Later that week, John visited an old friend, Maria, who worked as an art teacher in town. While they were talking, Maria shared a story that struck John deeply. She told him about a young student of hers, a talented girl with undeniable skill. This girl painted vivid, emotional pieces, the kind that made people stop and stare. But here was the strange thing, she never showed them to anyone. She kept every canvas stacked in the back of her closet, hidden from the world. When Maria asked her why, the girl always gave the same answer. What if people don't like it? What if they think it's terrible? What if they laugh? This girl had given strangers, critics, even imaginary voices the power to decide the fate of her dreams. Before she had even dared to pursue them, John felt a chill. Wasn't that exactly what he had done all his life? He had silenced himself before the world ever had the chance to reject him. He had locked his own potential away, letting fear and the opinions of others control his destiny. The lesson in her story. As he walked home that evening, John couldn't shake the image of that young artist hiding her paintings. Napoleon Hill's words echoed in his mind. You are the master of your fate, the captain of your soul. And suddenly, John understood. You are not a victim of your thoughts. You are their creator. You are not a prisoner of your past. You are the author of your future. You are not limited by your history. You are empowered by your possibility. If the girl had the courage to hang even one of her paintings on a wall, to show even one person what she could do, the world would begin to see her gift. And if John had the courage to take even one step toward his dream, the same would happen for him. A new blueprint. That night, John pulled out his notebook again. This time, he didn't just write down his dream. He began to write out a plan, a blueprint for the palace of possibility he wanted to build in his mind. He wrote down affirmations, words he would repeat to himself every day to remind him of the truth. I am the architect of my confidence. My past does not control my future. I will build brick by brick the belief that will carry me to success. It felt awkward at first. His old voice, the critic, laughed at him. Really, John? Talking to yourself in the mirror? That won't change anything. But then he remembered Hill's lesson: repetition of thought is how belief is formed. The same way he had repeated his failures until they became his truth, he could now repeat success until it became his reality. Choosing the builder's role the next morning, John faced a choice. He could go back to living as he always had, or he could begin rebuilding, and rebuilding meant effort. It meant practice. It meant reminding himself, again and again, that he was not at the mercy of his thoughts. He was their master. It was like being given the tools to construct a house. The tools alone wouldn't build it. But in the hands of a committed builder, they could raise walls, open windows, and create a palace. John decided he was ready to pick up those tools. The turning point weeks passed, and John began a simple practice. Every morning, he wrote out his dream in his notebook and repeated his affirmations. He started catching himself when the old voice of doubt appeared. Instead of obeying it, he challenged it. When it whispered, "You can't," he answered, "I haven't yet." When it said, "You're not good enough," he replied, "I am becoming better every day." When it muttered, "It's too hard," he declared, "that means it's worth the effort." Little by little, John began to feel stronger. Not because the world had changed, but because he had changed the architecture of his mind. The lesson of part 2: here's what John discovered, and what you must know too: the mind is always building. The question is, what is it building for you? A prison of fear, or a palace of possibility, a chain of regrets, or a bridge to your future? The choice is always yours. That night, as John closed his notebook, he smiled. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a victim of circumstance. He felt like a builder, laying down the foundation of his future one thought at a time, and he knew this was only the beginning. Backhand index pointing right. This was part 2. In part 3, John will discover the danger of small compromises, and how focus and discipline, applied daily, can protect his growing belief and push him closer to his dream. Would you like me to go ahead and draft part 3 in the same style right now? Or should I pause so you can review and adjust the direction before I continue? Part 3. Breaking free from opinions and perfection. The hook. John Parker sat in a crowded cafe on a rainy Saturday morning, staring at the conversations buzzing around him. Everywhere he turned, he heard the same theme repeated in different voices. "I'd love to try, but what would people think? I don't want to embarrass myself. My parents wouldn't approve." John smiled to himself, because he recognized those words. He had said them many times before. And he realized something startling: most people weren't stopped by lack of ability. They were stopped by the weight of other people's opinions. The weight of opinions. John thought about Maria's student, the young artist who hid her paintings. He thought about himself, holding back his dreams because of what others might say. And then he thought about a man he once knew, a neighbor named Richard. Richard had wanted to start his own business for years. He had money saved, experience in his trade, and a plan that made sense. But every time he was ready to act, he'd sit down with his family and friends, and every time, they would fill his head with doubt. "It's too risky. What if you fail? You should be grateful for your steady job." They weren't trying to sabotage him. They loved him. But they were speaking from their own fears, their own limiting beliefs. They couldn't see the world through his eyes. For years, Richard listened. For years, he stayed in a safe, secure, soul-crushing job. And every year, his dream grew dimmer. Finally, at 55 years old, Richard realized something painful. He had been living by other people's rules, carrying their fears, obeying their opinions. And in doing so, he had forgotten his own point. One day, he stopped asking for permission. He stopped weighing his life against their expectations. He finally launched his business. Was it easy? No. Was it risk-free? Of course not. But was it worth it? Absolutely. Because the weight of other people's opinions was nothing compared to the weight of his own regret. John's reflection. Walking home from the cafe that morning, John Parker couldn't stop thinking about Richard. He realized that for most of his life, he had been carrying weights that no one had asked him to carry. Opinions. Expectations. Approval. Napoleon Hill once wrote, "Opinions are the cheapest commodities on earth." Everyone has a flock of opinions ready to be wished upon anyone who will accept them. John realized he had been accepting those opinions his whole life, as if they were facts carved in stone. But they weren't facts. They were simply reflections of other people's fears. And it hit him hard. Other people's opinions of you are none of your business. The trap of perfection, but the weight of opinions wasn't John's only battle. There was another enemy lurking in his mind, one far trickier: perfectionism. For years, John had postponed projects because the timing wasn't right, or the plan wasn't polished, or he wasn't ready. But the truth was, he had been using perfection as a disguise for fear. He remembered a woman he once met at a writing workshop. She had been working on the first chapter of a book for 3 years. One chapter. It was flawless, beautiful, a true work of art. But she had never written chapter 2. Why? Because she was terrified it wouldn't measure up. She had perfected herself into paralysis. That's the secret of perfectionism. It isn't about excellence. It's about avoiding criticism. It's about maintaining the illusion of greatness without ever facing the risk of failure. The danger of waiting. John thought about his own dreams. How many times had he waited for the perfect moment to begin? He had told himself, when I save more money, when I know more, when I'm more confident. But the perfect moment never came. Because it doesn't exist. Napoleon Hill taught that success comes to those who act, not those who wait. The successful don't wait for perfection. They start where they are, with what they have, and improve along the way. The truth was clear. If John wanted to build his dream, he couldn't wait for flawless. He had to begin imperfectly. Rewriting the narrative that evening, John sat at his desk and closed his eyes. He listened to the voice inside his head, the same voice that had whispered to him for years. You're not ready. You'll embarrass yourself. You always mess things up. It was constant. It was cruel. It was familiar. And then, for the first time, John asked himself, who is writing this script? Because that's all it was, a script, a story, an inner narrative he had repeated for so long it felt like truth. But it wasn't truth. It was just a story. And if it was a story, then he could rewrite it. 2 men, 2 stories. John remembered a lesson he once read about 2 men who lost their jobs on the same day. The first man told himself, "This always happens to me. I'll never find another good job. I'm unlucky. I'm too old. This is a disaster." The second man told himself, "This is unexpected, but maybe it's an opportunity. I was stuck anyway. Now I can find something better. I have skills. I have value." Same event. Different stories. Completely different outcomes. The first man sank into despair and settled for less. The second man bounced back quickly and landed something greater. Why? Because your inner narrative shapes your destiny. John's new story that night, John opened his notebook and began to write. Not just dreams this time, but a new story. I am capable of learning as I go. I am not limited by others' opinions. I don't need to be perfect to begin. My mistakes are stepping stones, not failures. It felt strange, even forced. But John knew that repetition had built his old story, and repetition would build the new one. Napoleon Hill said, "Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve." So John decided to conceive a new story and believe it until it became his truth. The lesson of part 3 that week, John made 2 powerful decisions. 1. He would no longer let the weight of other people's opinions crush his dreams. Point 2. He would no longer wait for perfection to begin. Instead, he would rewrite his inner narrative and build his future on possibility, not fear. And as he looked at the pages in his notebook, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: freedom. Backhand index pointing right. This was part 3. In part 4, John Parker will face the danger of small compromises. How tiny choices, made daily, can either build momentum toward greatness or quietly destroy potential. Would you like me to go ahead and draft part 4 in this same style, or do you want me to pause here so you can adjust the direction before I continue? Part 4. The danger of small compromises. The hook. It didn't happen all at once. John Parker didn't wake up one day and throw away his dreams. No, it was quieter than that. Smaller. Almost invisible. It started with little choices. A skipped habit here, a delayed decision there, an excuse that felt harmless in the moment. But little by little, those harmless choices had shaped his life far more than any single, dramatic failure ever had. And now, sitting at his desk one evening, John realized the truth. Success or failure is not built in a day. It is built in the small compromises we make, or refuse to make, every single day. The forgotten morning a few years earlier. John had promised himself he would start his mornings with exercise and journaling. The first week went great. He woke up early, stretched, wrote his goals, and felt unstoppable. But then one morning, he stayed up late the night before and told himself, "It's okay, I'll just skip today." The next day, he felt tired again. Just one more time won't hurt. Soon, skipping became normal. The habit was gone. He didn't notice the damage right away. But a month later, his energy was down, his clarity was gone, and his goals were collecting dust. It wasn't laziness that killed his progress. It was compromise, tiny, repeated compromises that stacked on top of each other until they buried his dream. The story of Samuel the carpenter. One evening, John's mentor Maria told him a story. "John," she said, "have you ever heard of Samuel the carpenter?" John shook his head. "Samuel was one of the finest builders in his town," Maria began. "For decades he built strong, beautiful homes. But when he was close to retirement, his employer asked him to build one last house. Samuel agreed, but his heart wasn't in it. He used cheaper wood. He rushed the foundation. He cut corners in ways nobody would notice right away. When the house was finished, his employer handed him the keys and said, 'This house is my gift to you. Thank you for your years of service.' Samuel was shocked. The home he had built with shortcuts, compromises, and carelessness was the very home he would have to live in. Maria looked at John and said quietly, "Every day, you are building your own house with your choices. Do you want to live in a house made of shortcuts, or one made of excellence?" John sat in silence. He understood Napoleon Hill's warning that night. John revisited his notebook where he had written quotes from Napoleon Hill. One jumped out at him. "You are the master of your destiny. You can influence, direct, and control your own environment. You can make your life what you want it to be." Hill's point was clear. Destiny wasn't shaped by big events. It was shaped by little ones. One compromise may not seem like much, but repeated often enough, it becomes a lifestyle. And a lifestyle becomes a destiny. The coffee shop test. A few days later, John tested himself. He was at the coffee shop, working on a project he had postponed for months. His phone buzzed. A friend had sent a funny video. He felt the pull to watch it. "It's just one video," he thought. "It won't hurt." But then he caught himself. That phrase, "just this once," was the same one that had cost him years before. So instead of watching the video, he flipped his notebook open and wrote in bold letters, "Every compromise is a vote against my future. Every act of discipline is a vote for my future." That single moment felt small, but John knew it wasn't small at all. It was a brick in the house he was building. The choice of momentum. John began to notice something. Every small compromise created momentum in the wrong direction. But every small act of discipline created momentum in the right direction. If he stayed consistent, even with small things, like writing 1 page a day, making 1 phone call, or saving $1, those actions began to compound. They built confidence, strength, and progress. He realized success was not about giant leaps. It was about tiny, consistent steps taken without compromise. The farmer's lesson. One Saturday, John visited a farmer's market and struck up a conversation with an old farmer selling fresh produce. The farmer said, "People think harvest happens in one big day. But no crop grows that way. Every day, I water the soil. Every day, I protect it from weeds. The harvest doesn't come from one act. It comes from the sum of hundreds of small acts." John nodded. "So you're saying the little things matter more than we think?" The farmer smiled. "The little things are the big things." That single line stuck with John. Rebuilding his foundation from that week forward, John became ruthless with his compromises. When he felt like skipping exercise, he reminded himself of Samuel the carpenter. When he felt like procrastinating, he told himself, "This is a brick in my house. Do I want a strong wall or a weak one?" When he felt like chasing distractions, he remembered the farmer's words, "The little things are the big things." And slowly, he noticed changes. His energy returned. His confidence grew. His work improved. All because he stopped surrendering to the silent thief of success, compromise. The lesson of Part 4. John Parker learned one of the hardest but most powerful truths. Failure doesn't arrive as a storm. It arrives as a whisper. A skipped habit. A delayed action. A broken promise to yourself. Success doesn't arrive as a miracle. It arrives as momentum. A kept promise. A small step. A refusal to compromise. Napoleon Hill was right. You are the master of your destiny. But your destiny is built in the quiet, daily moments when nobody is watching. And as John closed his notebook that night, he wrote in big, bold letters across the page. Greatness is built in small, uncompromised choices. Backhand index pointing right. This was Part 4. In Part 5, John Parker will face another truth. Success is not about working harder but about protecting focus. He'll discover that distractions are the modern thief of dreams, and that focus is a superpower available to anyone who chooses it. Would you like me to continue with Part 5 right away, or do you want to review and adjust Part 4 first? Part 5. The Power of Focus. The hook. John Parker once read that a magnifying glass, when waved quickly over paper, does nothing. But when held still, when its light is concentrated, it can set the paper on fire. That image stuck with him, because it explained exactly why so many dreams, including his own, had struggled to ignite. It wasn't lack of talent. It wasn't lack of opportunity. It was lack of focus. Distraction, John realized, was the true thief of destiny. The distracted worker. One Monday morning, John sat in his office, determined to make progress on his new project. He opened his laptop, made coffee, and told himself, "Today, I will work with full focus." 10 minutes later, his phone buzzed with a notification. He glanced at it, told himself it would only take a second, and before he knew it, 20 minutes had slipped away. When he returned to his work, his mind felt scattered. He had lost momentum, and then it hit him. This was the exact pattern that had stolen years of his life. Not one big failure, not one dramatic mistake, but constant interruptions, constant splitting of attention. Maria's warning that evening. John shared his frustration with Maria, his mentor. She nodded. "John, have you ever heard of Andrew Carnegie?" "Of course," John said. "The steel magnate." "Yes," Maria replied. "Carnegie once said that his secret to success was this. He put all his eggs in one basket, and then watched the basket. He meant focus. Total, relentless focus. That's what most people never do. They dabble in many things, but they never master one." Maria leaned forward. "The world rewards focus, John. But it punishes distraction." Napoleon Hill's lesson. Later that night, John opened Think and Grow Rich again and read Hill's words. Concentration of effort and definiteness of purpose are the major sources of power. It made sense. A river, when wide and shallow, flows gently. But dam it, channel it, and that same water can produce electricity for entire cities. The same was true of the mind. A scattered mind produced scattered results. A focused mind produced power. The lumberjack's story. The next week, John attended a seminar where the speaker told a story about two lumberjacks. Both men worked from sunrise to sunset, but one kept stopping throughout the day to sharpen his axe. The other swung harder, faster, and refused to pause. By the end of the day, the man who sharpened his axe had cut down far more trees. The lesson was clear. It's not about working harder. It's about working smarter, through focus, clarity, and precision. John realized he had been swinging his dull axe for years, mistaking busyness for progress. The experiment determined to change. John created a simple rule for himself. No distractions for the first 2 hours of the day. He turned off notifications. He left his phone in another room. He set a timer and committed himself to one task, and one task only. The first day was uncomfortable. His mind itched to check his phone, to wander, to escape the intensity of focus. But he resisted, and something incredible happened. In those 2 hours, he accomplished more than he usually did in an entire day. His thoughts flowed smoothly. His work felt deeper, sharper. For the first time in years, he tasted the power of real concentration. The farmer's field. A few weeks later, John visited the same farmer he had met at the market before. This time, he asked him a question. "Why do you grow only a few crops, instead of planting a little of everything?" John asked. The farmer laughed. Because if I plant a little of everything, nothing grows strong. The soil would be exhausted, and I'd end up with weak harvests. But if I focus on a few crops, I can give them all the care they need. And the harvest is rich." John nodded slowly. It was the same with his mind. If he spread himself across too many pursuits, too many distractions, his results would be weak. But if he focused on fewer things and gave them his full attention, his harvest would be rich. The thief of dreams. John started noticing something disturbing about the people around him. At the coffee shop, people sat with laptops open but checked their phones every 5 minutes. At work, meetings stretched endlessly because no one was fully present. At home, entire evenings disappeared into television and social media. These weren't bad people. They weren't lazy. But they were distracted, and distraction was stealing their futures. Napoleon Hill had written, "The majority of men meet with failure because of their lack of persistence in creating new plans to take the place of those which fail." John now understood, persistence required focus. Without it, you never stay long enough on one path to see success. John's breakthrough. One Saturday morning, John sat at his desk with his notebook open. He wrote, "Distraction is the enemy. Focus is my superpower. Every time I protect my attention, I buy back my future." For the next 30 days, he tested himself. He committed to 2 hours of deep focus every morning. He tracked his progress. And the results were undeniable. His project, which had been stuck for months, finally gained momentum. He felt lighter, stronger, more confident. It wasn't because he had discovered new talent. It was because he had stopped scattering his attention. The lesson of Part 5. That night, John summarized his new discovery in one sentence. Success is not about working harder. It's about focusing deeper. He realized that most people fail not because they lack ability, but because they spread themselves too thin. They never give their dreams the full force of their attention. But those who learn to focus, truly focus, unlock a level of power and progress that feels almost unstoppable. As John closed his notebook, he felt the same fire he had imagined with the magnifying glass. The kind of fire that can ignite a life. Backhand index pointing right. This was Part 5. In Part 6, the final part, John Parker will face his greatest test: how to protect his vision, preserve his energy, and turn his inner growth into lasting success. It will end with a powerful call to action for readers to step into their own journey. Would you like me to go ahead and write Part 6, final, right now so your full 6-part series is complete? Part 6. Becoming unshakable. The hook. John Parker once heard a story about an oak tree and a reed. When the storm came, the oak, proud and unbending, snapped under the pressure. But the reed, though small, bent with the wind and survived. The lesson was clear. Greatness wasn't about size or strength. It was about resilience. It was about the ability to withstand storms without breaking. John realized this would be his final test, not just learning the principles of success, but living them when the storm came. The unexpected blow. Life has a way of testing you the moment you declare a new path. Just as John's project was gaining momentum, disaster struck. His company cut funding for independent projects. His small team scattered. And once again, doubt crept in, whispering, "See? You tried, but the world doesn't care. Maybe you were foolish after all." For a moment, John felt crushed. The old John, the one who lived for approval, who surrendered to perfectionism, who allowed fear to decide, would have given up. But John Parker was not the same man anymore. Maria's final lesson. That night, John walked to Maria's small office. He confessed his frustration, his fear that everything he had built was falling apart. Maria listened quietly, then asked him, "John, do you know the story of Thomas Edison?" John nodded. "He failed thousands of times before creating the light bulb." Maria smiled. "Exactly. And when reporters asked him how it felt to fail 10,000 times, Edison said, 'I did not fail. I simply found 10,000 ways that did not work.' That's resilience, John. That's being unshakable." She leaned closer. "Storms don't mean you're off course. They mean you're being tested. The question is not whether you will face obstacles, it's whether you will let them stop you." The inner voice. That night, John sat alone in his study, staring at his notebook. The old voice of doubt tried to rise again, whispering, "It's too hard. Maybe it's not worth it." But now, another voice rose stronger. the one he had been building over months of discipline, focus, and growth. It said, "This is only a chapter, not the ending. I am the author. I will decide the story." John realized something profound. Becoming unshakable didn't mean never feeling fear, never doubting, never stumbling. It meant refusing to let those things decide your destiny. The farmer's harvest. Weeks later, John visited the farmer one last time. He found him walking through golden fields, ready for harvest. "You see this?" the farmer said, spreading his hands wide. "There were storms this year. There was drought. But I planted, I watered, I protected, and now comes the harvest. The storms didn't stop me, they made me stronger. They tested my patience, and my patience gave me fruit." John smiled, because he understood. His own life was the same. The storms weren't signs of failure. They were proof that his seeds were worth protecting. The turning point. John didn't quit. Instead, he adapted. He used his mornings to work on his project alone. He reached out to new partners. He learned new skills. And slowly, momentum returned, not because conditions became easier, but because he refused to abandon the process. For the first time in his life, John Parker felt unshakable. He knew storms would come again, but he also knew he had the resilience to bend, to adapt, and to rise. The call to you. Napoleon Hill once wrote, "Every adversity, every failure, every heartache carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit." John Parker discovered that truth not in books, not in theories, but in his own life. He had faced fear, rejection, distraction, and setbacks, and through each, he grew stronger. And now, dear reader, the story shifts to you. The question is not whether you will face storms. You will. The question is not whether others will doubt you. They will. The question is not whether fear will whisper. It will. The question is, will you let these things stop you, or will you rise above them? Will you bend like the reed and survive, or break like the oak? Will you write your story, or will you let others write it for you? Will you leave this world with your song unsung, or will you live with such focus, courage, and resilience that your life becomes your masterpiece? John's final note. Months later, John Parker wrote a letter to himself. "I once believed success was about luck, talent, or timing. But now I know the truth. Success is about discipline. It is about choosing faith over fear, focus over distraction, resilience over regret. The storms will come, but I will not be moved. Because I am the author of my story, the builder of my dreams, and the master of my destiny." He sealed the letter and placed it in his drawer, not as a reminder of what he hoped to be, but as proof of who he had become. Closing words. And so, John Parker's journey ends where yours begins. Remember this: fear is a liar. Other people's opinions are not your reality. Your inner story can be rewritten. Imagination is the workshop of creation. Focus is your superpower. Resilience makes you unshakable. This is the legacy of Napoleon Hill's wisdom. And it is yours to claim, today, not someday. So go. Take the first step. Take the risk. Write your own story. Because the world doesn't need your silence. It needs your song. And only you can sing it. White heavy check mark. That completes the 6-part motivational story series in Napoleon Hill's style. Fire. Call to action. Fire. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that your future is greater than your past, then don't keep it to yourself. Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe so you never miss the next lesson that can shift your mindset and open new doors. Backhand index pointing right. Share this with a friend or family member who needs encouragement today. Sometimes one story can change the course of someone's life. Backhand index pointing right. Comment below with your biggest takeaway. What part of this journey spoke directly to you? Your words may inspire someone else who is still searching for their breakthrough. Remember, success grows where action begins. Take that small action right now. Subscribe, share, and comment, because your story of greatness is waiting to be written.